We have the final presentation of today's conference. We have left this presentation, which is a round table, to get livelier by the end. Elena Kirsanova, head of Aspect Company, Kharkiv City, and our invited experts, we have seen them before, Yuri Zirkun, Hans Westermarker, and Leonid Glazachev. You're all welcome. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming. I can understand that this is the very last session, and it's often very difficult to stay such long time. I'm grateful to you for coming, and I'm also grateful to our experts. A month ago, I called Stas Klinyuk and we talked, and they said, you know, I have questions about sales. How can we motivate salespeople? How can we build a sales department? Because companies grow and develop, and sales have to increase. Why don't we organize a round table, said Stas. And I think it's a unique opportunity for all of us to share experience in this field. When I thought about preparation of this round table, I had a couple of questions and issues, and I structured them in order for our discussion to be held in timely manner. And I've divided these issues in 4 questions. First of them is setting goals, and the second, how can we control achieving the goals, and the third, what kind of reward should we give to the salesperson or sales manager, and the fourth, when should we pay salary, bonus, and commission to our salespeople. Okay, the first question I'd like to arise is about the targets. Who do you think should set targets for a sales manager? For our audience, I probably need to explain. I was basing on the following structure of a company. There is an owner, there is a director, and there is a sales manager and salespeople. I'd like to ask you if you know or use other structures of a company. How do you think and who do you think should set the sales targets for the manager? In my company, I am joining the sales manager and director of the company roles. We have budget, we plan our incomes, we plan them according to the directions. We have selected a couple of segments according to our views. That's why in every direction I set a target. As of today, I set it quite approximately. When I have a manager, I say, I want this big volume of sales. Then we get some result. I see how different it is from what I wanted. And then, judging by this, I can adjust further targets. And then I have statistics per month, and we can take seasons into account as well.
And I will switch to English so the interpreters have some different experience again. I think, you know, to some degree, it's a question of what the company as a whole is looking for, and it also can depend on the size of the company when you're setting goals for sales. But typically, those would be set by either the head of sales or by whoever is, you know, overall in charge of the company. Again, depending, the structure you gave is relatively standard, I think. And but overall, the company's revenue goals would be set by the leadership, the executive team. In our case, it's a very high executive team that sets leadership goals and budgets and so forth, and then those come down to the various departments, including sales, of course, for revenue, and then to each individual after that for contributing revenue. I would also say that there are different goals for new revenue, meaning brand new clients coming from that have never been in the business before, and clients that are existing where you're looking to grow the business. So we call that either outside sales or inside sales, and there may be different goals for those because obviously the situation varies. I don't know if your question is coming from a place where perhaps the individual salespeople themselves have something to say about the goals. I don't know that there. I think there is some input that may come from them, of course, in terms of the knowledge of the market. But overall, in terms of I would say the revenue goals, those are set quite high and then implemented below.
Well, in general, as Hans has said something, we shared them with him in terms of thoughts. I'm going to add, first, global target selling is being done by high chain management. So this must be done by a company board, let's say, or a specific director, because it's a matter of strategy of what we want to do and what we want to achieve. The individual sales target per salesperson is of course devised by head of the sales department, because people work in different sectors with different volumes. They have different experience, and they have different luck or talent, you may call it this way as well. But the level of the head of sales department is just a general plan, and whereas head of the sales department also allocates precise targets to each salesperson, and he also distributes them between different sectors where everything is done in different way. And to conclude, in our company, for example, this is a mere example. The plan consists of something like Hans said, but slightly different. We have two parts to our plan for a salesperson. So the new sales and something to keep the client. If you have a considerable client that accounts for $200,000 per year or more, in this case it's a very good client that you must save and you must do extra effort. If you just sit and do nothing, you'd lose orders from him, even if you do the work with ideal quality. So what you have to do is to keep the clients within the company. If you achieve growth, is also important, but keeping clients is part of the plan, and this is in some way stimulated as well. Leonid, in terms of keeping clients, I have a question. We think about that as well. How do we do that? How do we keep the client from leaving our company? So as I see statistics, I see the volumes of sales per each client per month, and then I see a sudden drop. Is it too late? Well, in effect, it's probably too late to try and keep in client. If we have a decrease in the volume of order, that means we already have a problem. And the question for me, and I don't know the answer, and how do we do this? I mean, that salespeople have hundreds of clients per salesperson. Well, this is a special feature of our business. But how do we deal with this? It's an excellent question. First of all, I think you were absolutely right in saying that if you have a sudden drop in sales, that indicates trouble. That means you should have acted earlier. However, I would say the question is a lot more complicated, and I think Hans would agree. This sales retaining is a complex, comprehensive task. It's not only to do with sales department. This this is a task of account managers as well. They work together. For some reason, that in certain moment, it all begins with a salesperson, then it's being transferred to account managers, even though the tasks are slightly different, but they achieve the balance at the same time. So the question is, how do we retain? And it's a very overall question. So you have to devise a certain KPI and work with client on a regular basis, not occasionally or not where the sales drop or something happens, but you should do it on a regular basis, surveys, feedbacks. You must find out satisfaction rate. Sometimes you have to do it indirectly because they wouldn't answer direct questions or we just don't have time, but there are various subtle indicators which let you know whether the client is happy, or ask them very simple questions so that you wouldn't take much of their time. Let's say it's going to be a bullet point so that they wouldn't have to give a long answer because the clients are very annoyed. Well, you quite often receive surveys and you stop filling them in because you think the questions are very stupid. Secondly, in my bureau, it really depends on your clients, on your range of services, etc. In my company, statistics is done annually because there's a huge seasonality in our business. And secondly, we mustn't forget that even there where season is not a factor, there's a client who have huge projects. And we know that they begin them on a certain months, and then for a few months after we finish it, there is a drop, and it's no trouble. It's logical. You can see it in the statistics that this drop means that something is changing, or maybe not. And thirdly, this is not something to do with sales or account management, but in some way it has to do with the management, is also monitoring of political conditions. The changes can be done that the company that made an order was, for example, sold or integrated in some sort of group of companies. And of course, it doesn't produce any more orders. For example, this happened in our market. Our clients were integrated into bigger clients who were not ours, so we might have lost some work just because of outer factors that are out of our control. So you know that these are the clients that you have to deal with.
Of the job of sales and account management to keep our eye on these kinds of situations. So it shouldn't be a surprise. It shouldn't be a total surprise if one of your customers is acquired or merges or changes significantly. In other words, there should be some continuity in contact and communication so that you're aware, your direct contacts with that customer are aware that this is going to happen or might happen or it sounds like, looks like, and then perhaps senior leadership can jump in. In other words, you do have to look backward because that's important, but that's not the only way to look. You have to make sure that the people in the system are looking forward as well for potential signs for these things that might change.
Thank you very much. I'd like to add to the first question, because we're asking the inside and outside sales. What do you think? What is the percentage of the outside sales and the inside sales? I mean, in terms of dividing the right target, the right plan.
Okay. Well, this all depends on the goals of the company. It depends on a lot of factors, and frankly it ties in with the compensation plan and so forth. So if you want aggressive, strong growth, then obviously you're going to target more of a percentage for new business. It also depends on how you define the roles. So if you have a we call them a BDM, a business development manager, very often the overwhelming percentage of that person's time and energy should be focused on getting new business. Then they may work with account managers to manage that business going forward, even though it's still considered new for the company for a period of time. They don't necessarily day-to-day interact with that business, so they're always looking for new business. But your incentive plan has to match that. So if you incentivize them for keeping clients, then the plan they will focus on that. And if you incentivize them on new business, then they will focus on that. So it depends on the overall strategy for the company, I think.
If we take, say, a company who aims to, let's say, 20% growth, stable, constant 20% growth. So that depends on the size of the company. Is there a silver bullet then? What part of new clients and new business must the sales department bring? Well, there's no panacea or universal cure for it. Who cares where do they come from? Who cares where the money comes from? Whether it comes from the existing clients or the new clients. It's all more of a salespeople's matter. In our practice, the longer the salesperson works, the longer his plan is for recurring sale and the few for the new. Which means that we don't have account managers. I'd ask Leonid to tell about how do you allocate tasks between account managers and sales. We don't have accounts. There's the sales manager's job in our company. So the longer they work, the more clients they have.
I'd like to return to this issue. If we have a salesperson and they have their own clients, what are the incentives for the person to continue working if they don't get new clients? If in this case, does the client grow with the salesperson? The company continues getting the income, but not gets any additional client. I will reply. Some companies practice such a thing. In half a year, after they get a new client, they give it to an account manager or project manager. In our case, they gain some new clients and their income grows. How can you solve this question? You set a minimal target. You say the plan is 50,000 euro, but you will get the bonus only in case if you do at least 45,000. If you have 44 and 500, you will not get your bonuses. I'd like to ask Leonid, what's the functions of sales and account managers? What are their tasks precisely? Roughly speaking, I can say that the question is very broad. I can keep talking for half an hour. I'd like to condense. Sales person is the person who gets new clients and pass them on to account manager. The account manager works with production. He or she is involved in the production and is able to speak with the client on the level of which is which is closer to the project. Why can't we keep the clients with the salesperson for a long time? Because there are no people who are absolutely universal. Sales person doesn't know the small details of the production process, and it's not possible. That's why salesperson starts failing, making mistakes. He doesn't understand what exactly the client means in the process of work. In order for us to finely tune into the process of work, we have to involve an account manager. But the issue is we cannot have a very strict order between work of sales and account managers. Before, we tried to do it roughly. One moment switch from sales to account managers. At the moment, account manager doesn't understand all the necessary details. And the second thing is, sales manager is not always aware of all these details. The third thing we need to keep in mind, sales and account managers often communicate with different people. Your current projects and possible broader projects depend on your management. And this is very deep aspect. This is a reality. A salesperson works on another level where after or initial selection you will get into production area. And the last issue to we mentioned, the only mechanism we can implement is our sales, so that our sales is not lazy, is as follows: not to set the target, but to set up the incentive system. Any good company would incentivize the keeping of clients, and after that they will stop receiving their money. If a salesperson doesn't sell new things, he would just keep the old clients. His commission would get lower and lower, and finally he would feel uncomfortable. And then he would make conclusions.
We call them, at least in English we say, there are two different kinds of sales, if you will. There's the hunter, who goes out and shoots at things to bring the animal back to the cave, so to speak. And there's the farmer. And the farmer is tending to a garden or to plants and harvesting. So those are different species. Those are different types of people. And it's very unusual to find anybody who does both well. So the account managers are the farmers, and they tend to take care of their crops and harvest and make sure they're healthy. And the hunters keep going out and hunting. But in the end, it's true, it doesn't matter where the money comes from that you have. You can also grow your company with farmers. It probably is not as fast, and there's differences, but you can grow within an existing account. And so that's why it's not the same as having a project manager try to do that, because a project manager is yet another type of is not in sales at all and doesn't look at it that way. So it does come down to dividing the types of functions and then rewarding those with the right kind of motivation for financially. And one thing I would say is, in my experience, hunter salespeople have to be motivated by money. There's frankly no other motivation that is as important as money. If they are not motivated by money, they're in the wrong job. Sort of period.
Thank you very much, Hans. I'd like to continue our discussion because otherwise we wouldn't get to the second point. But I have to ask this question before we squish it. No, please do. Please allow. It's just a short quote. Sorry, I cannot allow that. I know you like to talk to Hans. Elena. Okay, I obey your orders. I think the audience would appreciate your action. Question number 2, how about we focus on hunters? If we set the target, what should be the time frame of this target? 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years? What's your opinion?
Okay, well, typically we for hunters, we give them, let's say, an annual target. Okay. That should be aggressive, but not impossible, but aggressive. Mm-hmm. And see, I think there are two things here. One is the sort of, let's say the annual target should be, and I would say in a reasonable sized company, in the West, it would be around $1 million of revenue per person.
To ask, do we have to set the plan only in money or in the number of clients?
Number of clients I don't care about. Okay. We're interested in revenue here. Mm-hmm. And so they could be one project for $1 million, but then, of course, I expect them to keep. That doesn't take all year. They should be able to do something else. But let's say it's $1 million. Well, then you can break it down per quarter and say you know how much you need per quarter and so forth. But I think there's a second element here, which is, we keep adding elements, but you don't just say, okay, go find me $1 million and I'll wait 365 days and see if you did that. There are tasks and things, and you ask this in your questions too, in your category of questions. What are the steps needed to achieve that? And how do you measure that this progress is happening? And how do you make sure that you don't wait a year and then realize, well, we didn't make it? So there's a whole series of topics around what you expect this person to do during the course of the year. But you certainly look at it, if not monthly, quarterly, and you say, how was your quarter? You're underperforming, and then in our experience, the pay is tied to that quarterly, because you don't wait a year to reward somebody. You reward them quarterly. So they're motivated to move quickly.
Okay.
And not wait until they get a really big project, 6, 8 months from now.
Well, yeah, a little bit. Of course, Hans, have you ever seen that I do not add something? No. I mean, all through, I know we know each other for some like 20 years, and anyway. Ну да, по-русски может.
Oh yes, I can speak Russian, of course. Gentlemen, there's two aspects. Sometimes we confuse them, but there's actually two aspects to the platform. One is the WIP and the other is the reward. So the reward is clear, is the percentage, the commissions, and maybe they're more anxious to get new clients rather than retain old ones. The plan is the WIP. So if they underperformed, how that's not bad, we'll think about whether you're doing the right job or reducing your pay or whatever. These are just two aspects, and Hans is absolutely right. Salespeople are motivated by money, but they also can be motivated by the WIP. So you can reduce the pay or, being fired if they have a problem with their target. There's similar things, but not identical. Two sides of the coin. And the second is exactly as Hans has been saying. You can't wait a year, even though our plans are definitely annuals. Sometimes because it takes time, because in shorter times, unless it's another business process. It depends on the workflow. If you get a translation of, let's say, a university degree, then it's a different plan than you can create it monthly. There are types of projects. The plan is annual, but of course we're trying to summarize it in shorter term. Right now we've reached a certain compromise. Our year is flexible. Each quarter we count by the last 4 quarters. So it makes this thing more flexible, and it simplifies the situation when you have an empty quarter, and in the end of the day sometimes there are some personal circumstances, family illnesses or whatever. If he didn't perform in this quarter, doesn't mean there's something wrong with him necessarily. So we have a look at the year, and then we count the average of a year. So each time it's the 4 last quarters. They flow slowly, always demonstrating current situation, but also is more flexible. I'll take up the topic on the methods of the WIPs and gingerbread. You have to understand that its effects are very specific for those who suffer diabetics and the masochists. Koste is asking KPI of sales versus revenue KPI. What is the best balance between those two in the client's mind? KPI of sales versus KPI of revenue. I've read it all in detail. As far as I understood, KPI on sales is when we have our sales and then we measure some target actions. We try this and we think, how do we look at it? But we're not really succeeding in it. Money is the only thing that works.
I think, if I understand this correctly, and with Kosti you never know, but what you're asking is the sort of, I would say, the activities of the process of selling, so that the tasks, the things you do, yes, exactly, and versus the revenue, versus the numbers. And you need both. You can't have one without the other, because as much as sales is sort of about relationships and about building rapport and about all those lovely things, it's also about numbers, and not just numbers of money, but numbers of activity. It's a numbers game, as we say. If you don't do enough of those things, you cannot produce. So you have to have targets for numbers of meetings, numbers of emails, numbers of phone calls, numbers of, all those things. and you say to your people, you must produce this number every week, every day, whatever the measure is, because this emphasizes the need to keep the machine going. So you don't get people who are saying, "Oh, but I have this great client that's going to give me work in next month, and it's going to be a huge project, and so I'm hoping that's going to be my big win." No, you have to keep feeding the machine. Even I would say, especially the successful salespeople know this. I've worked with some people in TransPerfect, for example, that have between $5 and $10 million worth of revenue coming in, and they're not all from $1 million projects. They're big, but and they're relentless about driving these numbers. So the activities, the calls, the letters, the emails, the meetings, all of those things have to be measured, and that's also how, from a senior executive position, you can see, are people doing the right things? Are they taking the right steps? So that you don't wait to see if they produce 6 months from now. If they're not doing the right steps now, I'm not waiting 6 months to pay them to not produce. So they have to be doing the steps right now, or you're not in the right job.
Я кратко добавлю, потому что Ханс уже
I would briefly add something. Hans has answered in main points, but the question is meaningless in my view. I would have sports as an illustration here. For example, you are training before competition. You need to run every day and train every day. That's beyond speaking. It's true for those who are not going to get medals. But if you do not train, you are not going to get any medals. If you have these requirements to train every day for 8 hours, you should meet them. To write letters, to work with your contacts, and so on and so forth. You have to have confirmation of your activity before you find some whip measures here. There is no KPI standards. You just need to continue working. And the second thing, how we judge our salespeople effectiveness is how they work. In the end, I'm interested only in the revenues. And the second thing which proves that they are working is a chance for them to get medals.
Tracking of the activities is especially important if you have salespeople that are not sitting in your office with you. Especially if you have salespeople who are sitting in USA or in West Germany somewhere selling for you. You must have these activities, and you must have a way of tracking them. And if they're not, if our rule always is, if it's not in Salesforce, it didn't happen. It doesn't exist. It's like Facebook, right? No pictures or it didn't happen. Well, we say in Salesforce, if it's not in Salesforce, you didn't do it. As far as I'm concerned, you didn't do anything. So you have to have a way of tracking this, because otherwise it's too easy to let time go by and nothing happens, and you then end up with trying to decide, do I keep this person or not?
We have one more question here. One more question from Konstantin. Do you single out separate specialists for CRM? Are there any other types of specialists?
Specializing in a particular type of client or a particular vertical? Or is that what he means?
I think he means other roles besides the salespeople. Any support roles. Well, that's my guess.
Okay, I didn't know what the CRM meant there, but
Well, because I mean the question is very vague.
Okay, let's move forward then. Давайте тогда перейдем к следующему.
Let's move forward then. We have mentioned that the salespeople have to get their targets in the exact numbers. We talk about money. We have said that we need to check their activity. What exactly do we have to check? Do we have to check the number of calls?
Every day.
Every day. Okay. Great.
Any other questions? Okay.
Как часто ты захочешь?
As often as you wish. Yura, you have to share your opinion with us. You may not look there. If you see day by day that your target of sales is maintained at the level you need. But if you need to take care of a client, you have to look there more often. If okay, you are suggesting that we look every day. I have quick sales. I see the result faster, quicker. I need to dig deeper if I don't see the result quickly. Yeah, I accept your reply. Okay. Okay, let's continue. The very last question. What's your opinion? What is the balance between fixed rate and percentage of incentives for salespeople? And when do we have to pay these? I mean the percentage. Is it necessary that we pay the project before it's finished or after it's finished? What's the ratio of these two possible payments? The question is quite easy for me. Maybe I don't understand something. Okay, well, the first. We pay quarterly, but according to the annual results. It means that we have some average numbers, because every time we have the average numbers for the last 4 quarters, and it's moving constantly. These numbers are constantly changing, which means we pay quarterly, but according to the annual results. Otherwise, we would have huge gaps. Sometimes they can be under the targets, and sometimes they can be above the targets with big numbers. The second thing, the ratio between these payments. In my view, the question is asked not very in the correct way. I can't say that we have some gold standard here. We have the following approach. The salesperson, any salesperson, has to get some changing rate. On the other hand, we understand the pitfalls here. If we have short sales, it's a possible solution. If we have long-term sales, it's not good for our salesperson. The ideal approach is as follows. The salesperson should get as much money not to die. But otherwise, they would lose their loyalty to our company. This is about minimal payment. And the second, it depends on the level of their final payment, because newbies and experienced salespeople have different levels of incomes. Could you share the ratio of rate and percentage? There is no ratio, because the success rate is different for all salespeople. In Russia, salesperson has a minimal salary 35,000 rubles. You can survive with that money, but that's not a good sum of money. And the second stage, you can earn up to 100,000 rubles. Okay, thank you.
And I would say, and I understand that, and this whole discussion about base and then commission or base and percentage. But the fact is that the salesperson costs money whether he produces or not. So as far as we're concerned, the best way to look at this is that their entire pay is considered a single number. So think of it, we call it a draw. What that means is you get a percentage of all the revenue you bring in. Let's just, for simple arithmetic, let's say it's 10%. So that means that every job that you bring in, you get 10% of that job. So your pay comes out of that 10%. You can make as much as you want, as long as but you only get 10%. Now, you can't sometimes start day one bringing in business. So we give you a salary, a draw, which means this is money that you can live on. And that number can vary greatly. It depends. It's lower for beginners, it's higher for senior people. But your pay ultimately is calculated as a percentage of the total revenue. So if, let's say, your draw is $50,000 in the US, and you bring in $500,000 worth of business, you've been paid 10% of your business. That's it. If you bring in $1 million, then you have been paid your base of 50,000, and you get the commission on top, and that percentage can, but it can only never equal more than 10%. So you get the rest of that up to the 10%. So what happens is you don't really get a salary, you just get let's call it an advance on your commission. And over time, if you're successful, you're trying to make more than that. But as a company, director and as an executive, that you will never pay more for any job than 10%. If the person doesn't produce soon enough, then that person is not going to stay. That person goes. Because you're paying too much for the business. You talked about this in your presentation, that every job, every quote you get costs you money to get. You have to pay for that. And so you cannot pay the salesperson a salary that's too high for not producing enough. So it always has to be ultimately that 10% in this example. And so we don't, want to function in terms of a base salary plus commission on top, because you will be very often out of balance with what you're bringing in for revenue. So there's only two choices. You either produce and you get your 10%, or you don't produce and you're fired.
Okay.
Well, I'll just add a little bit. У нас то же самое.
In our case, it's the same. I just didn't say it. I'll explain the mechanism, how we appoint the base. So and wolf must be fed by its feet. So we take into account net revenue, but that's the same. It mustn't be worth more than a certain percentage, but the work, having taken into account the salary, must be beneficial. So the salesperson must not acquire more than his base, because his base is being taken into account. And even if the base exceeds these 10%, then we're in trouble. And it's a matter of whether you have the bonus or not. It's a matter of where you're working in the right place and whether we continue cooperation with this person. So the issue is quite the same, but we have a various mechanism of calculating the exact mechanism, but the principle stays the same, of course. Sales might bring revenues if they destroy too much of your revenues, then it's the salesperson who benefits. Asking your questions on when do I pay them? We can pay as soon as we get the money, or we can pay as soon as we get the project. In terms of financial stability of the company, it's better to pay as soon as we get the money. However, does the sales influence on the delays? Do we automatically get the pay within 2 months? Will the sales be motivated if he receives a bonus 2 months after he actually won a contract? We've defined that we pay as soon as we get the project. and as soon as it's completed, because our projects are short. So this is where we calculate bonus, regardless of where we actually get the money on our accounts. Because we work with direct clients, with corporative clients, we also do not make the sales deal with debit debt. We have a special person who convinced the clients to pay on time, because it is our principle that a sales person who builds the relationship, who nurtures love with this relation, he simply cannot raid the customer because the latter is indebted.
We will not pay salespeople until the money arrives. Because A, the money might not arrive. B, we may end up with some kind of discount because of some reason or other, or all kinds of things. So it is absolutely a fast rule. You only get paid upon receipt of the money. And furthermore, I would add that, and this has been different in different companies where I've been, but there's a connection between the profitability of the job. So if the margin is too low, the salesperson doesn't get a commission. Now, you could say, well, but the salesperson doesn't have any influence over the margin. The problem is, unfortunately, that we find that if salespeople are left to do everything, to decide themselves, and this is also a question because we didn't ask this, but who decides the price? But if salespeople can decide the price, for some strange pathological, paradoxical reason, they always try to get they always end up lowering the price, which is counterintuitive because their pay depends on a higher price. But they will lower the price generally. So if they lower the price too much, the company doesn't make any money. We have to pay their percentage and the fixed costs and everything else. So they must participate in the profitability of the project. So, I know it sounds a little harsh, but that's how we operate.
Я могу только присоединиться.
I can only fully support in the terms of payment issue, hence our projects are long and there are two fundamental issues to them. Very often on long projects, specification change in process. First you've placed a order in 1 million and then it reduced to 200,000, and you cannot get your hand around that. What is the final outcome and volume until the end of the project, until the money has been paid? Secondly, sometimes people don't pay money at all, or they make giant delays, so there's no talk about commission to sales until we receive the money. Secondly, I say we have a flexible year, so in this quarter we've required a commission, and the other quarter it didn't, but overall the conditions are more flexible. And important aspect that I thought of while Hans was speaking, there is another issue that the salesperson cannot influence pay, and this is wrong to force him to give the money. Sometimes he can talk and find out who do we have to contact, because sometimes the management doesn't know that the financial director is holding pay. And in this case, you don't make them pay, but he writes a very humble letter, could you please help us? We're producing, but the money isn't paid. So salesperson does have a say in this matter. So if you have some kind of bureaucratic trap within the company, which is quite typical, because this person has other contact points within the company closer to those who make financial decisions. At this time, we have no task of forcing them pay. Sometimes we voluntarily ask them to help us out, at least to contact the right people. This might work. Thank you very much for your contribution in your experience. And what is the case in your company? Oh, I'm a moderator, I'm afraid. Perhaps the audience has questions? What is in your company? Everything's great, and I'll tell you after the presentation. There's a nuance that you mentioned, that the salesperson tend to lower the price. And you said that, well, it's in his benefit to sell for high price. But if you have a price of 100 units, if a salesperson gets a percentage out of these units. So it's better for a salesperson to sell twice for 90 rather than once per 100, because his commission will be calculated from 180 units. But for the company, it's not as profitable. Okay, thank you for that comment. Well, I can see it very well that it's better to get a commission from 90 or getting nothing from 100 because you don't win the 100. And you know, there's a paradox. Sometimes they would approach me, so we designed the model, we optimized it, we try to understand where does the reward go. They say, well, it's hard to sell because your prices are extremely high. And I thought about it, and then I phrased an answer that could be used as a quote. You know, if I had low prices, I wouldn't need you all, I'd fire you all, I'd just publish these prices on the web, and the people would approach me themselves, and you are here to make sales on high prices.
The prices are too high, we can't sell. I say, are you in sales? Then go sell. Okay? Don't blame it on the prices. Don't blame it on your leads. Don't blame it on all sorts of other things. You're the salesperson. Go make sure they understand the value that they're getting. And if they can't do that, then guess what? They shouldn't be in sales.
Да, еще один аспект. Это по поводу последний.
And the very last aspect, very briefly, in order to avoid this voluntarism, well, you know, sometimes you need to do discounts and very considerable if it's a good project. But to avoid this chaos when the sales absolutely drops the prices to a zero level, in our company this is not an ideal solution. But anyway, the sales has his own range within which they can vary the price if they feel they have to lower the prices, let's say 5%. To get not 5 or 10% discount, they must go to account managers, so the next person. If they want a lot bigger discount, they have to seek consent of the senior management. Sometimes we do give 20% discount, but in special cases they occur. But you have to give a consent from the company management consent. So if you trust it with the sales, the practice shows that they will drop it to a minimum, and they decide that they get higher salary for it. And this is the way we're trying to regulate this matter. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.